When you hear the word intimacy, my guess is you probably think about sex. And you're not wrong. But while sex is certainly part of the picture, there's a lot more to intimacy than just what happens in the bedroom. I'm your host, Rob Philo, and alongside my co-host, Marlee Arnold, we'll be talking with Dr. Juli Slattery about how couples can sabotage the intimacy they experience without realizing it. You heard from Dr. Juli Slattery earlier this season, and it was one of our most popular episodes, and we're so excited to be back here with her today. To catch you up, Dr. Slattery is a clinical psychologist, speaker, president of Authentic Intimacy, and author of the renowned book, God, Sex, and Your Marriage. No matter what stage of marriage you're in, you'll walk away from this conversation with tangible tools you can use this week to have deeper intimacy with your spouse. Let's dive in. Dr. Juli Slattery, thank you so much for joining us here on the WinShape Marriage Podcast.
So good to be with you. Thanks for having me.
So let's jump in with this word intimacy. When people hear the word intimacy, we most commonly associate it with this idea of sex. But could you talk a little bit about how intimacy extends beyond just the bedroom?
Yeah. Actually, we can have intimate relationships that aren't sexual at all. So you can have an intimate friendship like David and Jonathan had. You can have an intimate parent-child relationship. And so I think we need to understand that although sexual intimacy is a part of marriage, it's not the only part or not the most important part of our relationships. So intimacy is a relationship that's unguarded. It's instead of feeling like you have defenses up, like you have to play a certain role or read a certain script or meet somebody's expectations. It's a relationship where you actually can be who you are. You can be honest and really feel known and seen for who you are. And the other person feels that same way. So if it's just one-sided, it's not intimate. You think about like a therapy relationship where one person is disclosing a lot and the other person is kind of like a blank slate. Like that's not intimacy. But when you have both people who are learning to trust each other, learning to create safety, really wanting to be vulnerable and to be known for who they are, that's when you experience intimacy.
Yeah, it sounds like this idea of nakedness, not in literal nakedness, but in nakedness as far as like you can trust somebody and have open conversation.
Right,
and that extends
exactly.
even beyond just the husband and wife relationship, it sounds like.
Yeah, it sure does. Yep.
So for the husband and wife relationship, in terms of intimacy, the intimacy that isn't physical, so the intimacy that they're sharing outside of the bedroom, whether it be through vulnerable conversation or, emotional intimacy and sharing their feelings or what's hurting, burdening their heart or something like that. How does that intimacy that is not physical intimacy affect the intimacy in the bedroom? How does the intimacy outside affect the intimacy inside?
Yeah. I actually think it creates the opportunity for intimacy in the bedroom because a lot of couples can be sexually active but not sexually intimate. And so they know how to be physically naked with each other and engage in the action of sex, but they're not really sharing that journey. It's not safe enough for them to talk about maybe what their fears are, or maybe they even have their own thought kind of patterns going on while they're physically naked. One of them might be kind of like checking out or dissociating. Another one might be thinking of like an erotic memory from something they saw before. That's not intimacy. So I think it's helpful for couples to understand that God's design for sexual intimacy is actually not just about your body. It's about creating that kind of safe space where you really can show up as your whole self and be honest and transparent and have the difficult conversations. So you can't do that in the bedroom if you haven't first learned to do it outside of the bedroom. It really does pave the way for, I can trust you. We know how to communicate with each other. We know how to even like navigate a conflict or navigate a relationship that's really difficult, if you can't do that outside the bedroom, then your sexual relationship is actually going to feel like, wow, it's dangerous because it can be so vulnerable and we don't know what to do if we hit one of those conflicts.
Yeah. What are some things outside of the bedroom, I'm curious, that you can do that would impact your relationship inside the bedroom? Like, what are some real practical things?
Yeah. I think these are things that you all teach really well at WinShape. Something as simple as, 15 minutes a day having what some people call couch time, where it could be going on a walk or whatever it might be, where you actually just look at one another and you take time to connect. It's not, oh, who's going to pick up the kids and why didn't you pay this bill? It's, I want to know about your day. Like, what happened that was stressful for you? What happened that was a victory for you? Where's your heart? How are things? What has God been teaching you lately? And so these kinds of mini conversations that don't have to be 2 hours long, but just can be 15, 20 minutes a day are teaching each other like, hey, I want to be a safe place for you. Like, I want to learn to share what's happening in my life with you and not just be at the place where we're kind of like coexisting and managing a household, but we don't know each other anymore. So that's a simple one. Also date night is a great one. Once a week or once every 2 weeks, getting out and having fun together. Again, this is not your business meeting. This is not the time to talk about what's wrong in your marriage. This is a time to just say, hey, let's make sure we're not forgetting how to play together and experience new things and go on adventures and explore things. Like, that's a form of intimacy, of associating fun and pleasure with one another. So doing that, and then learning about conflict. We all have a style that we brought into marriage of what we do when things feel scary or conflictual or threatening. And most of us will either do something like get defensive or get angry, try to be argumentative and prove our point, or we might withdraw. We might shut down emotionally. We might create some distance. If you don't know how to learn to navigate those conflicts and really talk about the issues and be able to stay in that place without feeling like overwhelmingly threatened, then there's a ceiling on your intimacy. Like, you just can't go to certain places. And so learning some of those basic conflict skills, which again, every couple needs to learn. Like, all of us come into this with some wrong patterns and habits, but learning those skills, that a conflict doesn't have to be a fight, that we can learn to navigate differences, like that really, really helps expand your capacity for intimacy in the bedroom and out.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So I appreciate you sharing those examples. And I'm thinking, as you say that sometimes people then might fall into this trap of, okay, well, if we just talk more, then like we'll have better sex, we'll have better intimacy, physical intimacy. So on the flip side of, sometimes those 15-minute or 20-minute couch time, that eye to eye, those date nights do in fact impact intimacy positively. But can you tell us a little bit, on the other hand, how sometimes this idea of talking actually fails to build intimacy in marriage?
Right. Yeah. And so true, Marlee. A lot of times in relationships, you'll have a talker, like somebody who really connects through talking. Maybe 70% of the time that's the woman, but it can be the man. My husband is a talker. But you usually also have somebody who doesn't necessarily love talking and conversations and actually can feel threatened by them. So I think sort of the stereotypical way this happens is, a wife says to her husband, like, let's talk about us. Let's go on a date and talk about us. And a lot of guys are going to hear that as, okay, what am I doing wrong? And I don't know how to talk about us. Like, that doesn't sound fun or inviting or anything. Like,
I had that exact same thought.
Yeah. It's like, no, let's not talk about us. And so, a lot, I heard it put this way. In general, women like to process life together and men like to do life together. And so particularly for a lot of men, if it's all about talking, they're going to feel like kind of out verbalized by their wife. They don't always know the words to put to their feelings or their experiences. And so that's going to feel like work. And yes, we do need to learn to talk. We need to learn to overcome conflict and things like that. But we also have to be sensitive to the fact that our spouse might really say, like, the greatest intimacy for me is when we just go tackle life together. It is going on an adventure. It is traveling to a new place and figuring ourselves, how do we find ourselves when we get lost? Like, how do we find our hotel? Like, that's fun. Or it might be a project like building something, or it might be like being in ministry together and serving together. So, and then also, like, just even with sexual intimacy, there's a time to talk and there's a time to touch and there's a time to just enjoy each other's presence without having to process everything. And so I do think that there needs to be a balance, and you need to be aware of your own preferences of, I can process things to death sometimes, or I really don't like to talk and I avoid hard conversations. So usually God puts us in a marriage where our spouse tends to balance us out with that.
Yeah. Now, Julie, there's this quote that I read from you one time, and it was really interesting. I'd be curious to get your thoughts on it. You said, there are some couples that are sabotaging intimacy without realizing it.
Yeah.
Now, could you share some examples of what that means, particularly from your own marriage?
Yeah, I think we all sabotage intimacy at some level without knowing it or realizing it. So, for example, even referring back to what I was just saying, a woman might really think that working on intimacy in our marriage is, let's talk about what's wrong in our marriage. And her heart might be, well, I just want us to improve and I want you to understand my needs. And like, that's genuinely why she wants to have that conversation. But her husband hears it like, you mean I'm failing? You mean there's one more thing I'm doing wrong? And so he now wants to withdraw from not only that conversation, but from being relational with his wife because he feels like he just can't get it right. And so that woman doesn't realize that even in her effort to approach her husband, she's actually creating distance for him. So that might be one example. I think in similar examples, like a husband might really emphasize the sexual relationship and always be flirting with his wife and think, like, that's fun, like, that's how I pursue her. But she's reading that as all he wants is sex. Like, he's objectifying me. He doesn't care that I'm exhausted and that the kids are all over me, that I just want to break. And so every time he flirts with me sexually or initiates, I don't feel valued at all. I actually feel objectified and like I'm just here to meet somebody else's needs. And that's not what he's thinking at all. And so those are just a few examples. And, there's many more, but, in both of those situations, like, we can so misread each other that the ways that we think we're building intimacy actually get in the way of it.
Yeah. It sounds like just crossed wires makes for just unmet expectations and things like that. Is the solution there just to have a conversation and say, hey, this is what makes me feel valued and wanted. This is what makes me feel intimate.
Yeah. I mean, even better, I think, to start the conversation with asking your spouse, what draws you into intimacy and what makes you feel distant. So we all tend to approach relationships with the assumption that my spouse wants and needs the same thing that I do. And that's just not true. I don't know if you guys had this experience in marriage where you bought your spouse a gift that you were really excited to give them because you would have been excited to get it. Maybe early in marriage, and you're like, they didn't like it at all. It's like, you just start with the assumption that if I would like this, of course he would like this.
How could they not like this? Yeah.
Rob, did you ever do that?
Oh, I'm sure I've done it a handful of times. But yeah, you get to this point, you're like, how could they not like this? Like, this is amazing. But yeah, they're just different. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I have learned with gift giving, I always need to ask my husband. Like, he's very particular, very specific. After many years of me giving him gifts that he ended up returning to get what he really wanted, I was like, all right, well, why don't you just tell me what you would like instead of me trying to figure out this mystery. Now, I will say his birthday just happened, and I actually got him something he wanted. He didn't return it, which is a huge victory without me asking him.
Wow.
Nice.
That's
But that
amazing.
rarely happens. But I think emotionally, the same thing is true. We naturally go into marriage emotionally thinking, I'm going to bless my spouse by giving them what would feel good to me. And so I think it's having the posture of humility of just understanding, like, as much as I might think I know my spouse, I really don't know where they are right now. And I need to ask them, like, they need to teach me what the kind of things I do that foster intimacy and safety would be, and even help me understand some of the things I might say or do that I have no clue, but it's actually creating distance. And so when we start by asking our spouse that, it really is a safer conversation than if we start just by telling.
Yeah.
Now, is there room in those conversations for some compromise or some middle ground? I'm thinking of with the example of the husband initiating via flirting or something like that. If the wife doesn't necessarily love that, or it wouldn't maybe be her number one way, but is there room where I could just imagine someone saying like, okay, well, does that mean I can never initiate that way? Like, is there some room for some
Yeah.
back and forth there?
Yeah, I think in that situation, I'd really want that couple to get to the place where the husband could say, this is why sex is important to me. This is why sexual intimacy is important to me. It's what makes me feel connected to you. It really is, like, I find great joy in it. It's just, I love this aspect of our marriage. And the wife can say, okay, I hear that. That's not how I necessarily feel connected to you. How I feel connected to you is when I really see that you want to help me. Like, you see the kids, hanging on me, and I got to put them to bed, and I'm worried about the homework. And I really feel connected to you when you step in and you want to help me with that. Like, that's what makes me feel close to you. So now they're not just talking about their sexual relationship, they're actually understanding each other's needs. And so now the compromise becomes, well, how do we meet each other's needs? And that gets into the very practical of, the wife saying something like, what would really be a turn on to me is if you got the kids ready for bed. Like, you gave them their bath, you put them to bed, you gave me some time to relax. And then I could actually be in a mental space, in a physical space where I'd want you to initiate sex. Like, I'd be ready for that. And he's like, okay, I can do that. So it doesn't mean that now he can't flirt, but it means that he's being sensitive to the fact that if he's just initiating sex without caring for her needs, she's not going to take that as an invitation of kindness and intimacy. She's going to take that as a demand. So I'm just using that as an example, but
Absolutely.
That's where we're getting to the deeper level of really being able to communicate those needs.
Okay.
And then say, okay, well, now that I know that, and now that I've expressed to you what's important to me, how do we navigate that in real life?
Yeah. And I guess I'm just hearing that it's, which I know we had you on earlier this season as well, and it's not a one and done. Like, it doesn't happen quickly. It doesn't happen overnight. And being able to get to that deeper level of intimacy is going to take some time of having those hard conversations, those vulnerable conversations, and talking through my needs, your needs, how are we meeting one another's needs. And it takes time to do that. Like, you're not just going to meet them like all of a sudden, like a genie in the bottle, and like, oh, I'm perfect at meeting your needs, and flip a switch. So
fun thing is it changes. So
yeah.
just, once you got it wired, you move into a different season where there's new challenges, and
yeah,
it's like, now we need to keep having that conversation.
Yeah.
But it's, I think having been married now for 30 years, when my husband and I go to a wedding or something. We can be really excited for that young couple, and there's aspect of their intimacy where it's like, okay, they have bodies that work better than ours do, or they're in their prime, they're beautiful. But when we look at the 30 years of work that we've been able to do, of the journey of having those conversations and learning how to resolve conflict and learning each other's needs and trusting each other, it's like we wouldn't trade it, like for perfect bodies. And so God really has given just the gift of maturing love over the years, that it becomes more precious with that time because of the journey you've been on together.
Yeah, absolutely. That's beautiful. I think about the seasons that you kind of have walked us through, and this might be a little bit of a challenging question, or shifting the gears a little bit from the beauty of the maturing love that you just shared. But if there has been a season where there has been a breach of trust, or like broken trust in a marriage, how do you work toward recovering intimacy after that?
Yeah. So Marlee, first of all, I think that there's breaches of trust in every marriage. So breach in trust can be even carelessly sharing with somebody a secret about your spouse. And, I think we've all done that and had that happen, where it's like, I told you that story. I can't believe you shared that with so-and-so. That feels like a breach of trust. Or it can be, we had a vacation planned. I was looking forward to it. And then you just said yes to a work commitment. That means we have to cancel that. So these are normal breaches of trust. But what you're really, I think, even referring to is like a deep breach of trust, where there's been a betrayal, there's been an affair, there's been a habit of lying and hiding something, where I can't trust you anymore. There's been ongoing pornography use, that sort of thing. And what we have to understand, both from a relational perspective and even from a biblical perspective, is that when there's that kind of infidelity or breach of trust involved, it's actually like an earthquake, like it's a crack in the covenant promise that you have in marriage. And when there's an earthquake and the ground starts to move, it's like, wait, like it's all stop here. Like we can't move forward. And couples who try to just move forward without really addressing that breach in trust, they'll either find themselves back in the same place in a few years, or they never really can rebuild intimacy. They just kind of go through the motions. And so it's critical when there's been a significant breach in trust like that it really is a timeout. It's a crisis. We need to get help. And I know that WinShape provides intensives for that kind of situation. I've sent a lot of people to intensives in that kind of situation, because it's not your normal, like, let's just go see a counselor once a week and, we'll figure this out. It really is understanding the shockwaves of what that's done to you personally, what that's done to your relationship. It's doing the work of understanding how this happened. And it's doing the work of assessing, is this relationship healthy enough now where we can start rebuilding trust? Because something significant has been broken. And it does take time. I think marriage experts would say it takes between 2 and 5 years for a couple to really fully recover from something like an infidelity or betrayal. And so it's not a short-term, one-and-done conversation. It's an ongoing process.
Yeah. Thank you for walking that through with us. And you're right, there are marriage intensives, and we can link information to that if there is someone that might find themselves in that situation.
Yeah. Now, Dr. Slattery, we began this conversation with this idea that intimacy is this nakedness, not physical nakedness, but emotional, spiritual, whatever it may be, nakedness. And for the couple that's listening, that's thinking like, we have walls built up, like we feel divided, we don't feel connected. What's something that they can do to start the process of developing intimacy in their marriage?
Yeah. I think it depends on what kind of walls there are, how long those have been there. Sometimes it really does require a third party to kind of help navigate, particularly some of those initial conversations, if there's been just years and years of lack of trust or bitterness or that sort of thing built up. But in general, it's a slow process. It's a slow process of showing interest in the other person, of not just being about the moment of how I feel with you right now and how I don't feel safe. I feel very guarded, but shifting to say, I want to understand your experience. And that might be baby steps, like we talked about, even just that 15-minute a day conversation of, I really want to hear what your day was like today. We don't have to get into the conflict of our marriage, but I want to take a step towards you. And then that might transition into the next time you have a discussion about something that you tend to disagree about. Maybe it's finances or it's something about parenting. Instead of retreating to your normal corners of, I knew you'd say that and you never agree with me on this. It's like, help me understand your perspective. Like, I know I see it this way, you see it that way, but tell me why. Like, tell me why it's important for you to save money and to not necessarily spend our money on a vacation. Like, help me understand that. And so what you're really doing is a mini version of like what you all do at the marriage intensives, which is really pursuing your spouse's heart. You're saying, I'm going to put the issue aside momentarily. It's not about me getting my way. It's about me understanding your heart. And there's all kinds of resources that can help you do that. There's podcasts, there's books, there are conferences that give you some of those tools. But it's starting to recognize, like you can win every fight in your marriage and still lose your marriage because you've stopped pursuing each other's hearts. And so that really is the first step of, like, hey, like, let's lay down our weapons and let's just pursue each other's hearts. Again, slowly at first until you begin learning some of those skills and you start rebuilding trust.
Yeah, that's really good. There's been a wealth of wisdom in our conversation today, and we're so thankful for your time. What's one thing that a couple listening should take away from our conversation today?
Yeah, I think every couple has momentum in their relationship going one way or the other. It's momentum that either makes them feel like more guarded, more defensive, like less connected, or it's momentum that makes them feel like able to trust each other more interested in one another, closer, like more connected. And regardless of where you are, like really just think for a minute, like where are we? Are we on a cycle where we feel more and more disconnected? Or are we on a cycle right now where we're really taking steps to grow and understand each other? And if you feel like you're in a cycle that's just been that defensiveness and guardedness, like I just really encourage you to take a step, to say, I don't want it to be that way anymore. Take a step, whether it's just asking God for help and wisdom, whether it's taking a step and just saying that out loud to your spouse. Like, we've been on a cycle, I think, where life is just getting the better of us and we're not connected. Like, I just really miss you. I'd love to work on us, or whatever it might be, that invitation might be. And just, make a commitment that we're not just going to let the momentum of drifting apart take away our marriage. We're going to really fight for it.
Yeah, I love that. Dr. Slattery, thank you so much for being with us today.
Yeah, it's been a joy. Thanks for having me.
And for those listening, thank you so much for tuning into this episode of the WinShape Marriage Podcast. We'll catch you back here next week.
Hey there. If you're enjoying this conversation, make sure to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more marriage resources. And let us know what you think of this episode in the comments below.